Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to this RCT construction series. As you can see, we've got an inverted coaster in our hands here, and we are working on the next addition to our Fun Corporation additions, I guess, if you want to phrase it like that. Some of you guys are right on top of it. We've got a B&M invert for one of the two parks. I will let you figure it out in just a moment. So I'm going to kind of break this video down into two parts. So the first part, this is going to be a B&M Batman clone, like just not a custom design, but just a literal piece by piece recreation of a Batman clone that we're going to put at one of the parks. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this into sections. So the first part, which we are on right now, is going to be the actual layout, design, and construction. And then we'll switch on over into the actual placement of the ride at one of the parks. I recorded this once already, but it was like really late at night after work, and I was really tired. I wasn't horribly happy with the results, so we're going to go ahead and start again, this time right here. Now, annotation right now, or I guess word of, whatever word I was going to try to use there. I did build this layout once already, so I already have like the kind of the piece by piece breakdown of how it's going to work and how I'm going to fit it together. And it actually ends up turning out really, really well, and I think it actually fits. There's one thing about it that kind of like stretches out. There's some elements that are kind of drawn out a little bit more than I'd like, but as far as game limitation goes, I think this layout turned out phenomenally, and it's the closest I've gotten to an actual full-on Batman recreation in real life. So we're going to go ahead and begin here. So we're going to place the station 20 feet up in the air. And we're going to start, we're going to start 15 feet in the air. Right there. There we go. And go from there. So to fit an 8-car train on an inverted coaster, you need a 4-tile station. And B&M inverts, I believe the longest car length they have is 8. There's some with 7. And I believe there's one with 6. And I think it's also a Batman clone. But at least this is for like the full-scale thrill inverts, not the family ones that have been going to SeaWorld parks recently. We're going to go ahead and start with the station, and then one thing I do with my B&M coasters, and I do this for every single one, at least of these older ones, B&M coasters are very well built. And if you're an enthusiast who has been around and seen B&M coasters, at least the early model, like the 90s models, the 2000s up to the 2010s, they are very, very well built. To the point where, I mean, when the train dispatches or heads towards the lift hill, nearly every B&M coaster has drive tires that sets the train into the lift hill at almost the exact speed the chain lift is already going to limit wear and tear on that chain. It's really, really impressive. Just even the way B&Ms sound, they just sound really well built, and parks that work with them love working with them. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. To mimic that drive tire, I'm going to start with a piece of chain lift, and then a gap with no chain lift heading into the lift, and then we're going to start the actual lift. So it'll start out of the station into the speed that the train is going to need to catch the lift at the exact speed it's going to go up the chain lift. So that's a long, convoluted way of saying we're just going to leave a gap of chain lift right here. So it's going to look a little weird, but I do that anyway. If you build B&Ms, you don't have to do that. I just do that for effect. And we're going to go up 85 feet. So it's not going to be fully to scale. B&M Batmans are around 110, something like that. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. And then we're going to start with the pre-drop, one gap, and we're going to drop into the first drop. Now, one thing I was really hoping Open RCT2 would add before we got to the B&M era in the Fun Corp series was kind of wider turns for the inverts. The dev team has done an excellent job of adding more track pieces, and I'm very, very excited for that. So don't take this as a dig on them. In fact, I think they do a phenomenal job, and the place this game is in is absolutely amazing. But we're going to need to extend this out just a tiny bit. So we're going to have one gap here, just like that. And then we're going to have the other piece there, just like that. And then we're going to keep it angled. And then right here is the first valley we're going to go. Now we want the first vertical loop to travel to the left. So we'll go ahead and get that set up. Vertical loop left. Whoopsies. There we go. And we're not going to go any further down than that. We're going to leave one gap. We're going to go up to 40 feet. And ground level at this park is 0. This is just a design park I have, so it's not anywhere. This is just a place I can kind of put layouts together and have them ready. So ground level is 0, if you're curious about that. So this would be 40 feet off ground level at the park you're at if you're trying to build it. I do have an RCT Go and Any Designs page now, so I might upload this design to that in case, you know, you really don't want to do it yourself and just want to plop it in. But I have this handy guide just in case you want to follow it. So now I want the rider's feet to angle in the opposite direction, to the right, towards the station for the 0G roll. And now we're going to drop down to 10 feet. So instead of having it go into the next vertical loop at the same height, we're going to have it drop down a little bit more and head into the second vertical loop with a little more speed, so it carries a similar speed through the second loop as well. Now the second loop is going to go out to the, is going to go out to the right. I'm just going to use the standard vertical loops. I don't want the large ones. The B&M Batman clones aren't horribly big, so we're just going to stick with that. So if you notice here, we have 2 straight track pieces into the second vertical loop. And then after this loop, we're going to dive down to 5 feet, have 2 straight track pieces, and then we're going to turn in towards the station. So we're going to be angling over to the left. And we're going to make this an upward helix. And then we're going to go up into a banked turn. And now we're going to kind of go into the lull in the layout. So Batman clones are very, very intense, and they're very non-stop. The original Batman clone at Six Flags Great America, when it opened, took the spot of a Schwarzkopf shuttle loop. And as you know, a Schwarzkopf shuttle loop is literally a straight line. And the fact they were able to fit a Batman, the fact that B&M was able to fit as much of a layout as they did in that small space is very, very impressive. But we're going to go into kind of the first lull in the layout, and it's a very nice, if you've been on a Batman clone, this is kind of a spot where you can catch your breath a little bit. This turn into this upward helix is very, very intense, especially falling out of the loop 0G roll loop action. So this is one of the only spots you're going to get to actually take a breath before we dive back into more action. So we're going to angle back down, do a bank turn back down to the ground. We're going to level it off, have 2 straight track pieces, and then we're going to do our corkscrew, and we're going to corkscrew to the right. You know, I still get my corkscrews backwards with direction, so sometimes I have to hover it and then go, oh, that's wrong. So we're going to have another straight track piece there. And this is the spot where I'm kind of like, I wish I could have done this better, but with the game limitations, we'll just kind of use what we can get. In reality, this turn would angle more towards that loop. We'd have the corkscrew or flat spin right here, and then a tight turn here. But since we can only go in like the 4 cardinal directions, we're going to dive down here, and we're going to do kind of a overbank like that. And this would be kind of and on this layout, this would be another spot to kind of catch your breath because the train does not travel horribly fast through this element. And then we'll dive right back down, this time going back down to 5 feet. We're going to have a 1-track gap, I believe 2-track gap, and then we're going to have a right-handed corkscrew over the track into the helix, and then 1 more straight track piece, and then we can angle up into a nice wide turn into our final brake run right here. And when it comes to final brake runs, we're going to start back here. When I do this, I'm going to leave 1 gap. I'm going to do my block brake here, my 4 mile an hour, 2 spaces. And then if you enable all drawable track pieces, you have this booster option. Now, I tend to use this booster option as drive tires to kind of pull the train through the final section, through the transfer, through the final brake run at a decent speed, because it tends to pull it through at about 5 miles an hour as opposed to 4, and it doesn't lose speed going through these. So we're going to do that. We're going to have 1 more gap here. We're going to do a normal brake at 4. Actually, no, hold on. We're going to do another block brake here so this can clear earlier. We're still only going to run 2 trains on it, but we're going to have this extra gap here because that'll help a lot. So we'll have another block brake, a space, another booster section, another space, and then we're going to do a 4 mile an hour brake there, a space, and then we're going to do a double brake here at 9 and 18. And then that's going to top our layout off. With these old 90s era B&Ms and any B&M coaster until about 98, 99, 2000, it's going to be all friction brakes. So when you hit the final brake run, you're going to go in with a lot of speed, and the friction brakes are going to kill that speed really, really quick. So in-game, if you want to make it more practical for in-game purposes, I would set these higher up. But for the purpose of making it more realistic, I'm more of a sandbox builder, and I like to build realistic parks. I'm going to have it hit the brakes pretty darn hard because that's what it would do in real life, and then slowly travel through the final section through the transfer into the station. But that is going to be our main layout right there. And I think as far as the Twister Bowl at the end, I think it turned out really, really well. And I'm very happy with this. Now, just to kind of hop off the video, we're going to paint it the best Batman colors there are. The one at Six Flags New Orleans with the... I can't remember if it had purple trains. I think it might have had like gray trains with the black shoulder harnesses. But it had the black track, yellow painted rails, and then gray supports. And I think that's the best look. The original Batman at Great America opened all black. So you can have that as your option. Or Over Georgia and Magic Mountain have theirs blue. But I'm going to stick with the best Batman colors with the black track, yellow rail, and gray supports. The coaster that's going into the Fun Corporation Park will not be this color. It'll be kind of a custom painted color. It will have black track, though, in case you're curious. But that is our Batman clone. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the transfer tracks on B&M Batmans. Now, I'll throw a picture of the layout of the Batman at Great America on screen right now. And if you look at it, the 0G roll starts out almost straight, but then it kind of angles into the left towards the station, but it leaves enough of a gap over here for the transfer track to be placed right over here. Now, with B&M coasters, they actually do recommend you transfer both the trains off of the track when you are done operating for the day. So the transfer track on the Batman clones actually is going to be on the inside like this, and there's space for 2, so I'd want 8 pieces of track right here. Unfortunately, with the in-game, cardinal direction limitation of construction, I'm kind of stuck right here with the track in the way. So when I build this coaster, and you'll see in the construction, the transfer track will be on this side with the 2 pieces, and I'm going to actually have them be side by side as opposed to vertical like the Batmans are. But in reality, this is where the transfer track would be. It would be on this side right here, and it would be straight vertical, just like this, all the way through. But with the helix turn right here, we're not going to have room for that. But anyway, as I was talking about, B&M likes to have parks transfer the trains off at night. And the nice thing about the way B&M builds their transfer tracks, if you ever get the chance to kind of look at them, there aren't any running rails right here. I mean, there is when you start, but when you park a B&M, I believe it parks it, at least the early ones will park it on the upstop wheels. So the road wheel is the one that rides on top of the rail here. It's going to take the most abuse throughout the day because that is where the weight is going to be sitting underneath that, and all that weight's going to be resting on that road wheel. So when they're parked overnight or just parked in one spot, what can happen is they can develop flat spots, and that wheel can go bad, and the riders can feel that throughout the day. So when B&M coasters transfer off, they'll actually sit on the upstops where it won't be felt nearly as much, and the road wheels will stay intact. So this actually won't be rail here. It'll be kind of like a flat rail on the bottom underneath. Newer B&Ms like Rapterra at King's Dominion actually have a separate set of wheels underneath, specifically designed for the trains to rest on, so the actual running wheels, upstops, guide, road, aren't touched at all. But anyway, that is our layout completion for the B&M Batman right there. So we'll go ahead and move on over into the construction at the park. All right, and we have transitioned over to Joyland in Albany, New York, which is where this Batman clone will end up being placed. So we're once again going to go in the kind of western side of the park. So if you look at the entrance and Think of that as north. We're going to the northwest corner where Laser Looper kind of is over in this area. So we relocated Great Chase and the Spiral Tower from those spots. You can kind of see the dirt plots up there in the corner. We moved those over to the island that we have, so we're kind of starting to populate that. And we're going to use this plot for the B&M invert. So as we get started, we're just going to go ahead and plop it into place. I have to find things to talk about for about 30 or so minutes, so I hope I can keep you entertained for that long. But we'll go ahead and get started by placing the two transfer tracks, and I kind of mentioned where I was going to place them. We don't have the ability to angle the 0G roll out to the right to make space for it, so we're going to place the transfers on the opposite side that they would be placed in real life, and we're going to go ahead and get the color scheme set for the ride itself. So we're going to go with black track and purple supports. I think this is the exact same color scheme I went for Gamble Shroud over at my World of Remnant Ruby Base Park, because I really like the color scheme and I really like the way it fits together with the theme I'm going for the ride. And I'll talk more about that once we get more into the area building, because this ride's going to kind of have its own whole themed section. We're going to place the entrance on the far side towards the parking lot, and it's going to kind of wrap around, and we'll have the queue go underneath, and we're going to get started on working on the catwalks for the B&M coasters. So for the arrows, I kind of used the basic wooden support structure, so it kind of had a hollow feel, but for the B&Ms, since they are a much more expensive ride, I thought I'd go with something more solid that just looks much more well-built, I guess, is the term I'd look for. And originally I was going to follow the same support structure I had for the previous inverts I had built, like Ruination at Mega World Park, or I think Gamble I ended up using this on when I rebuilt it. However, I decided I'd give custom supports a shot for the lift hill and the final brake run. Typically, I'm actually pretty darn okay with the way the in-game supports look on the actual layout. You can kind of see it from the first drop to the main layout itself. I like the supports as they come basic, so I tend to kind of leave those alone. However, I have been doing some custom support work on the lift hills, and we're going to follow suit right here. Laser Looper kind of has really minimalistic custom supports on the lift hill, and we're going to follow suit with that here. And I'm going to follow the same railing style that I had before. Now, as I place this, I end up needing to rebuild it because I placed it wrong a couple times, which is really, really embarrassing. And this was originally a live commentary where I had gone over it in person, but it just ended up being really boring. So here I am overdubbing what I had before at a really fast pace, because this took like 2 hours. There you see I misplaced everything and had to redo it. But it ended up being really boring, and I ended up like apologizing multiple times through it, and I really didn't want to have to put anybody through that. So here I am re-recording through this. And I think I've mentioned before, I tend to avoid the custom catwalks that come with the custom support sets. It's just a really small thing, but they end up like when the train travels over, you can see like the pixels flashing through each other, and I really can't stand that. It's just like a pet peeve of mine. So I end up using the actual vanilla in-game stuff for the catwalks, and I think they end up looking pretty well. The only thing that doesn't look horribly great is the fact that you can't angle the base blocks to have them follow the lift hill a little bit, which is going to be interesting if I ever try to build a dive coaster. But you know what? We're going to cross that bridge when we get to it. But as far as the railings go, since OpenRCT2 implemented the ability to angle like base walls and railings like that through the tile inspector, I think you can actually get some really nice looking lift catwalks with just vanilla in-game stuff. But I did end up going for the custom supports on the lift hill itself. If you hear my cat in the background, she really wants to hang out. I told her I'd be right back, so you don't have to feel too bad for her. I'll hang out with her after everything is placed. But we're going to go ahead and get those footers placed. We're going to get the basic layout of the station done. Now, when I originally recorded this, I had the station and area kind of set up. However, at the end, I ended up kind of going back and redoing things after I had slept on it for a little bit. And I wasn't horribly happy with the way some things in the whole area itself were placed. So I ended up going back and going over everything again. Man, I did this real time. This just takes so long. There's so much little detail. Like, that's one of the crazy things about OpenRCT2 to me is like, you can just build a ride. Like, the layout took 15 minutes to put together. However, all the custom detail supports, like I said, took about 2 hours to get done. So you can get really detailed with this stuff and make it look really nice. I really think this lift hill ended up looking really good, and I think this whole ride ended up looking really good as well as we get into... I mean, this is just the basic ride itself, and I'll have more to talk about once we get into the actual area construction itself. But let's go ahead and talk about the Batman clones. I know I talked about them a little bit, but personally, I think I have been on 4 Batmans. It was the first one I went on was the one at St. Louis. The second one I went on was the original at Six Flags Great America. And then the third one would have been the one at Great Adventure, and the most recent one I've been on is the one at over Georgia. Now, for as base, I mean, the layout being the exact same, you'd think those rides would ride almost the exact same. And to an extent, they do. However, all 4 of them definitely have distinct personalities, without a doubt. The one at St. Louis is probably the one that's the most basic of the 3, I would say. Actually, I can't even say that because that's a mirror image. So the one at Great Adventure is the most basic one I've been on, I'd say. My favorite one is the one at Great America. It runs pretty angry, although it doesn't have the wheel covers on, so it looks a little strange when you watch it from the side. And it's kind of funny because the invert trains in the game in OpenRCT2 and RCT2 and RCT1 as well also don't have the wheel covers, so it kind of like fits that whole aesthetic as the original Batman does. But the one at Over Georgia, it was closed the first 2 days I was at that park. But let me tell you, that thing ran so angry, I felt like it was trying to rip my feet off. So that one, the original is my favorite, but the one at Over Georgia is a very close second. And then I like the color scheme on the one at Over Georgia as well, with the blue track, black supports. Anyway, hopping back over into the game, I'm getting a little off topic here. I'm going to go ahead and build my supports for my transfer track here. I'm pretty happy with just the basic in-game scenery stuff. I don't tend to use other rides for scenery pieces. I know some creators do, just not something I'm a horribly big fan of, especially when it comes to, you know, clearing a park, or if you close it to build something and then you have to go back through and open everything individually, and then it just hogs ride space as well. Not a big fan of it. So I tend to end up avoiding stuff like that. Now, the station here you're going to see, pretty basic box. Not horribly detailed, not very uniquely shaped, but I ended up being fairly happy with the way it turned out. And the reason I'm okay with the station building ending up as just a giant box is because you really don't end up seeing it from the area you're in. The area I went for, I tried to make it kind of a medieval village to tie in with the storyline. Over history, let's just go ahead and hop into the storyline for this ride. So over history, there's plenty of stories of, you know, royalty or kings that went mad with power. And we're going to kind of follow that same basic storyline here. So originally and the area is going to end up being called King's Isle. So when King's Isle, it's this little village, and when the new king ends up in that position, he inherits this power, he's initially really well liked, and the people love him, and that's still kind of the case even in the modern day. However, as time goes on, they notice people in the village tend to start disappearing and just vanishing overnight, and no one knows what happened to them. Well, as it turns out, the king is a little bit nefarious when it comes to that, and we do end up having the riders be the challengers to the king. So when the riders go on, you are challenging the king, or the king man, so to speak. And as you end up going through the queue, you walk past a mass grave. So there's a bunch of little headstones you'll walk by. Um, and as you go through the overflow, there's just a bunch of small details you can look at with kind of like that horror fence that ends up being there. And you, as you ride, are one of the king's challengers. And it's not said whether or not you win when the ride comes to a stop. But I thought the whole idea was kind of cool of like being able to walk through and wander through a medieval village. So I kind of went for it. As you're looking right now, these are some custom supports that I end up redoing because if you look at the one closer to the entrance to the station building, that gets very close to where the train travels over, and don't end up being horribly happy with that, so that ends up changing. And then as far as the entrance to the queue goes, I wanted to place it so it looked like you kind of had an entrance. Flight Deck at California's Great America has a really cool entrance plaza where you enter right below the 0G roll, so I wanted to keep that and use that here as well. So the main entrance for the ride will actually be beneath the 0G roll, as you can see right there, with where the end of the queue line is currently placed. And then now we're just kind of going back through for some additional detail work on the custom supports. I end up getting rid of the cross support on the front there and just continue it through the actual ride itself. Doing a little bit of detail work on the station building itself, and then kind of hiding it from the parking lot with some foliage so it doesn't look too gross from the outside looking in. But now we're just getting that fence placed along the queue line, getting a little bit more of that detail work done. We're going to build an overflow queue here, which ends up looking a little bit different than what it does right now. But we will get into the redoing of that as well. And I'll kind of talk about why I made some of the changes I made when we get there. Just doing a little bit of queue shade overflow. We'll do that over here too. This first overflow ends up the exact same at the end. So this is the final product for this second overflow right here. Leave a little bit of space for another scenery piece there in the middle for guests to look at while they're in line. We're going to start putting together the restricted area fence. If you're unfamiliar, there have been a few incidents with inverted coasters and people being in their path, and you really don't want to do that. I'm not going to get into any detail about it, but there's been some tragic accidents of people getting a little too close to inverted coasters and not knowing where the train is in relation to where they are, and not good things come out of it. So we're going to make sure to put up that restricted area fence so there's no possibility without really trying to get into that area where the train will travel through and get close to the ground. So you just saw the entrance to Meadow Falls. I'm gonna kind of try to keep the same basic style there for the entrance, and we're gonna kind of get some more building detail here around, and we're gonna outline where the buildings are. So now, what you're seeing right now is the basic layout for the path I had originally come up with. This does end up changing as we go through. Again, I slept on it a little bit, decided that it wasn't necessarily the final product that I wanted, so I went back and redid it a little bit. The idea behind this area, it's kind of boxy, but it gives off kind of a claustrophobic feeling. At least I hope it does, and I think it kind of does. So if you're ever in that area, you feel kind of closed in, which is I kind of want to build that unease, especially with the storyline of the ride. I mean, you have this, potentially, this king that's kind of god mad with power that really wants to keep that power and keep stuff hidden. So it kind of keeps that uncomfortable feeling, that potentially someone could be watching you as you're going through. And we're going to have a kind of a castle wall around with paths up top where you could potentially put entertainers that could kind of play the king's watchmen as they go around. And then we'll kind of have an access area right here to get into the restricted area should you need to. Obviously, you'd want the ride motion disabled before you did that. But so far, I think looks pretty good. We're going to kind of get the souvenir stands placed. The souvenir stands here are going to be more accessible. I kind of like to have, if you go to a park nowadays, there tends to be a lot of, merchandise where, you get off the ride, you walk down the exit path, and you walk through a merch stand on the way out, and it tends to work really well. A lot of Cedar Fair parks did that. Gatekeeper does it. Patriot at Worlds of Fun does it. There's a lot of coasters at Cedar Point that do it, especially. I mean, it started kind of with Gatekeeper or Maverick, whatever. whichever ride you want to think of, but they really continued that tradition. So you want to build up that dopamine high that guests have when they get off the ride, and hopefully they'll think about buying merchandise for it. So we are gonna kind of follow that same philosophy here. That's the word I was looking for. If you look in the middle here, we have a hat stall that is not going to end up in that exact spot. So I end up building this ugly, ugly square rectangle building around it. And I'm going to end up going back and changing that so it's more village-like. The medieval theming looks really good. I think you get a couple small buildings that work really well. And I ended up not using them to their full potential when I placed this, ugly looking building right in the middle of it. So don't worry about what this building ends up looking like, because it is going to go away. It's not going to end up staying there whatsoever. Another one of those things I kind of slept on and decided, nah, that ain't working. So I went back and redid it to make it look kind of nicer, I think. But I did kind of, my cat's meowing, so if you can hear her, say hi in the comments. But I did end up using a lot of foliage here, which I did end up liking a lot. Again, kind of keeping that claustrophobic feeling here. We got a couple of food stands in there, so you can kind of get the full experience inside this area. And now we're going to go into working on the castle wall, and then the castle entrance, which is where the entrance for the ride, the Kingman, is going to end up being. So it's going to end up going right there. We're going to cover up the entrance and exit and kind of build a castle-facing exterior that you enter through. And the zero-G roll kind of frames that right behind, and I think it ends up looking really fairly nice. I'm sure I could have done it better, but at the time, and I'm not upset with the way it turned out. I'm pretty happy with the way it ended up working out, so I'm not too upset with it. And as I was going through and building, if you're ever not sure about a build you've got, just step away for a little bit, because I recorded this all in one sitting, and I wasn't 100% sure I was happy with it. So I went back, just kind of put this footage aside, put the live comm aside, and ended up being not 100% all in on the final design. The entrance of the ride ends up being pretty similar, although I think I do end up replacing the purple walls with more of the plaster looking stuff, so it just kind of gives a little more color as opposed to that rough edge. But I think for the most part, at least the castle exterior ended up looking pretty okay. It's kind of boxy, but at the end of the day, I think it looks pretty darn good for that. And the purpose I ended up building it for. So we'll use this little building here. It doesn't really fit in with the ride, but it's not inside the new area, so that could kind of look pretty basic with the brick wall. But then we're going to start placing our cover for our exterior wall and our, kind of walling in our area, making it look and feel kind of like its own isolated place. And again, kind of giving off that, claustrophobic. I wouldn't even say claustrophobic is kind of the base idea, but it's still pretty open on the inside. I mean, you have room to walk, but it feels walled in, and you kind of feel, like you're inside your own area that anyone could be watching. And I think I've said that before, but I'm going to say it again right now. And then we'll end up putting the path up top. So if I want to put entertainers up there, I can. So it looks like you kind of have the King's Watchmen walking around. I didn't end up actually doing that, but it is something I could have done. And I thought about, but I didn't really feel like paying the entertainers to walk around. My cat is really yelling at me right now. She can wait, hopefully, another 10 or so minutes before I wrap this video up. So there you kind of have the initial food stand there. I really like this entrance sign above Kingman there with like the actual wall text like that. I like that a lot more. So when we go back, I end up widening that building up, and we're going to get to that here in just a moment. So here is the basic outline of what originally King's Isle looked like. However, as I said, there were some things with it I was not horribly happy with. So after sleeping on it, we're going to hop right back in. So we're going to start by demolishing that building because it was ugly and I didn't like it. We're going to move the armory, which sells silver hats, which are supposed to be helmets. And we're going to widen this building up as well so I can fit one of those bigger signs in there. We're going to narrow up and kind of hide that restricted area gate with the foliage fence and then the chain link fence behind it. We're going to do a little bit more detail work and make it feel a little bit more like you can walk around, so we kind of have the grass and mud mixed together a little bit so it looks like people were kind of roaming around out there. We're going to keep the same basic structure to this building, but again, keeping the same basic structure and same layout, but now we can add a full sign there for to use, and I accidentally deleted those 2 castle top pieces. But I think it ended up looking pretty good right there. And then what I did was I divided this path off into 2 separate little winding paths. So when you come through the main entryway to King's Isle, you kind of have more of an open area. And of course, as I go around and place some of the structures around, even with clearance checks disabled, it still like deletes some of the walls, so I have to replace a little bit. But this ends up giving it a more village feel, so you can kind of get, the people walking around, making it feel like, you're actually part of a community, which was the initial conception I wanted to use. I think this ended up working a lot better for that. And then we kind of have the Kings Isle Market right there, where you can get your food, get drinks while in this area. So it kind of can operate as its own self-contained section of the park. Oh my goodness, she's almost got the door open, guys. She got the door open, so you might hear some more meows here in just a second. But as far as this area goes, with the foliage inside, I think it ends up looking pretty good. And we're going to go back and edit the building a little bit. I want to have more interior queue, so you can have, and you really don't have to detail the inside of the building, which is kind of nice. We're going to go back and replace these supports. I can never seem to decide to do something, like finish one task at a time. I have to go do a bunch of different stuff and then come back. But I feel like opening this up worked really well. I ended up trying to do some more supports on the top end here, but I ended up not having a connection piece, so I ended up deleting it, so it can end up being kind of ignored. When it comes to building stuff, try something. If you don't like it, you can always get rid of it later. And sometimes when you try stuff, you end up liking what you've got. See, there's the 2 pieces right there. RCTConstruction joined by a cat. Oh, this is awesome. We're going to go ahead and start working on the interior of the building. We're going to kind of get like the basic, we're going to kind of make the dirt floor inside so it kind of outlines so it looks like there's more of a foundation to the building itself. We're going to cover this queue right here. I'm going to end up opening the overflow at all times, so it's always going to have an open overflow on the inside there. This ride ends up having a capacity of like over 2,000 guests an hour, even with the dispatch slowed down to make it more realistic. For comparison, Laser Looper across the way has a capacity of like 1,000 riders. So Laser Looper has like a full line, full queue a lot, whereas this is almost always a walk-on, but it's still filling trains. I mean, these B&Ms are capacity monsters. That's what they're designed to be, and boy, do they accomplish that goal really well. And again, when it comes to this interior queue here, I don't think I need to make it horribly detailed. It's just a box I can kind of hide because you can't really see it from anywhere outside or anywhere inside the area. You can kind of see it from the parking lot, but I can also kind of hide it with foliage. So it ends up looking pretty darn nice on the interior there, I think. And then there's our little graveyard to kind of fill and give guest queuing an idea of what goes on behind the scenes here as you go to challenge the king. And then as we go around here, we're going to find a spot to add an on-ride photo section. I ended up deciding to put it right there before the second corkscrew. I did end up changing it a little bit. I put it one more piece forward just to kind of fit a little bit better. Not a huge fan of the way the on-ride photo section looks for the inverted coaster, but it's an extra money maker that you have, and people love to buy on-ride photos. I tend to walk right by the on-ride photo at the end, but a lot of people do look for on-ride photos. I cannot tell you how many people I've had ask about, or I've heard people ask about on-ride photos after their ride's over if there's no one at the photo stand. So another thing I ended up doing here is I widened the entrance. I widened the second entrance to King's Isle, so there's 2 entry paths so the guests don't get lost. In an ideal world, I would have had that entrance towards Swashbuckler, our swinging ship, and the Joyland Theater be the only entrance to King's Isle, so there's only a one-way in, one-way out. Kind of like how Universal did it at Epic Universe. So there's like a portal entrance, and there's only one way in or out of each zone. However, I ended up changing that just for pathfinding reasons. And then I ended up putting that sweet-looking little gate right there. However, I couldn't end up using it, because if I ever had to open the overflow, I couldn't do that. So for the most part, I think that's going to conclude our RCT construction for the Kingman here. I'll put a little bit of background. I know I haven't shown the ride run yet, but it keeps the pace really well, I think. And I'm really happy with the way this ride ended up turning out. So thank you for tuning in to this RCT construction for the first B&M of the Fun Corporation series. We're officially in the 1990s. We're in the era of B&M now. Arrow's starting to move aside, and we're starting to get some new players in the industry. So this is an exciting time. If you've made it this far through my ranting, thank you very much for getting to this point. You've gotten to hear our cat be very, very nice and attention hungry over here. But again, hey, thanks for tuning in. This is RCT Creations for RCT Construction, the Kingman. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you later.